Thank you everybody for being here and hopefully participating. I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna talk for, I don't know how long it'll be, to try and just give a sense of both the Karrabing Film Collective, the conditions of its emergence, and its reason for producing work. And I will show some images to help us along, and then toward the end, I'm going to start showing video clips in which the work of the collective becomes in motion. And then, sorry, the dinging is still dinging. Hello, everyone dinging in. And then end with a couple short videos in which other voices of the Karrabing talk to you. And hopefully you'll see that there's a deep relationship between what I'm saying as one member and the only white member of the Karrabing and what the other 30 to 40 members also think and state and do. Is that good? So that's the kind of the outline, and then we can like get into a discussion. And hopefully the discussion will be longer than my presentation. Is it? So that's the blueprint for the next hour and 15 minutes, it looks like. Okay, so I'm going to start by I'm going to start in a really simple way, and many of you might have run into what I'm going to say in various places, and many of you will not have, because why would you? But so Karrabing is actually Karrabing, and it's a Emmiyenggal word. So I'm a member of the Karrabing Film Collective, and Karrabing is a Emmiyenggal word, and Emmiyengal is a indigenous language located on whose lands, although we're going to see how complicated this gets for y'all very quickly. But let's say it's the language spoken on the and from the territory of the Anson Bay region, which is just southwest of Darwin in the Northern Territory of Australia. And I'll show you a slide of where all of this is in a second. So Emmiyengal is a language, and in the Emmiyengal language, Karrabing means it refers to the moment when the sea tide is at its furthest out, and there are enormous tides up there, when it's at its furthest and it's set to return to shore. So Karrabing means low tide turning back. And it's paired with karakal, which is when the tide is at its highest and is set to go out to sea. Now, for some English speakers, at least, and I'm not sure about German or French or Italian, etc., low tide would have the connotation of like tree store when you hit rock bottom, or like it's marked. Whereas high tide would, have that connotation of everything's coming in and doing great and all that. But that doesn't mean that. It doesn't have those connotations in the Karrabing's world. So Karrabing, low tide turning, does not mean, oh, you've reached the furthest and now everything's about to get good. Because as Natasha Bigfoot Lewis has said in many interviews, who's a 30-year-old member of the Karrabing, and her mom and others say that both Karakal and Karrabing reflect different great conditions of existence. When the tide's out, one can go into the mangroves, one can go along the reefs, and when the tide's up, you can fish and you can use boats to get to different shores. So the first thing to know is that Karrabing is an Emmiyenggal term, and it refers to these conditions. And these saltwater conditions really define the region of Karrabing members' country. Second thing to know is that Karrabing is essentially a family-based collective. There, can you see that? Yeah. Which Really, in some ways you could say its core is defined by the descendants of Ruby Yerwin, who's seen here, and her husband, Roy Yerwin, who were Emmiyenggal. Ruby was a Ngungudi, that black snake, and Roy was a Murmur, or a long yam, and these are their kids. And so in some ways, the family core descends from them and people that their kids married. But more importantly, perhaps the core of Karrabing is a friendship network, or what we would say is that it's a group of people who, amongst all the people you're related to, and you're related to everybody, it's those relations that stand up for you and stand up for each other, right? So in the world in which they exist, there's a very broad, very robust understanding of extended kinship, or what we would just say kinship. Like you would say, maybe some of you would say extended, but we don't say extended. So your mother's sister's kids are your brothers and sisters, and extends out this way and that way, and etc. I won't go too far into it. But of all that world of kin, Karrabing is composed of that part of which has gotten up for each other since they were kids. So they were intense. The best way to say it's not friend, but intensified kinship relations. And thus, in crucial ways, Karrabing is a mob versus a clan, if you're using this weird modernist anthropological discourse. And you can see behind this picture of Ruby the anthropological imaginary of a clan, which is, the triangle is a guy. And so it just descends patrilineally. And where, we are your father's brothers, or your father's brother is your other dad. And so, there's all these things. But for the anthropological imaginary, the clan owns the land. So you would just say, well, these are all the people who own the land from this clan ancestor. Say Ruby Ngungudi would be the clan ancestor, the totem Ngungudi, and then it descended, it became human and descended. But in fact, what Karrabing is something on the right hand of the screen, which is a set of these, and it's not just, it's like the anthropologists love the triangle, the guy thing, but it's a set of these relations. That is, all of these would be your brothers here, all these would be your sons, all these would be your fathers, but it's that set that stand up for each other, that get up for each other, right? So it's a family-based clan, but it's not everyone in the family. It's those people, it's a lateral and descent group. In fact, we don't say Karrabing Film Collective, we say Karrabing Mob, or Mibla Karrabing Mob. So we use the sense of mob, not as just an undifferentiated crowd, but an understanding that you can be related to many, many people, but only certain numbers of those people get up for each other, meaning feel an obligation toward maintaining a relation of care. And we should also note that this extends to the more than human world. There's only a subset that gets up and cares for a set of more than human relations. Okay, so the other thing to know is that Karrabing began, like, people say, when did Karrabing begin? And we could say that the Karrabing began, the film collective or mob began in circa 2007. Oh, and this is where, sorry, this is Belyuen. Here's Belyuen, here's Darwin. So the collective began in around 2009, 2 years after the intersection of two forms of settler governance created a conflagration, a riot in the Belyuen community. So this is Belyuen over here. It was created in the 1930s as an internment camp to force all the indigenous people who, you can see my cursor, yeah? Yeah, all the indigenous people whose lands stretch along the coast, right? And then in 1976, under the passage of the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, this internment camp, which had been called Delisville, the name is changed to Belyuen, and it becomes part of a small part of Aboriginal Land Trust area here. So the first form of settler governance that's really important to the emergence of Karrabing, right? So Karrabing is just a word. It's not, doesn't refer to a clan or a tribe. It just refers to the tides that you can see here. So the first thing to know is that in 1976, the Australian federal government passed a piece of land legislation that it claimed was like, you know, it was changing the relationship between settlers and indigenous people by providing a mechanism for indigenous groups in the Northern Territory to claim their traditional lands. And here's just some extracts of the Land Rights Act and just one of the thousands of protests for Land Rights Act in the 70s that forced the passage of this act. There are a number of things to say about this that are important to why Karrabing emerged and what it is. And the first one is to say you have to remember that these kinds of these sorts of pieces of legislation are super weird. You just have to unpack what they're actually saying. It's as if I stole something from one of y'all, and then I decided under enormous pressure to allow you the right to petition me to give it back to you, but I am the judge of whether I want to. Right. So the logic is just like really loopy, but the state is claiming this really great is with self-determination, but the state is still determining who gets their country back. It's the state remains the arbiter of the settler state. And the basis of this is really important. You can see the traditional Aboriginal owner here, this definition that's from the preliminary definitions of the act, basically inscribes into the law an anthropological model of the clan. That is the thing I just showed you here, right? Now note the way in which this is segmentable, right? So that although you can go back to the clan ancestor, this would be one clan as Nungudi and Moromoro, let's say, Long Yam, Roy Yerwin, Nungudi, Ruby Yerwin. Note how they're separated. So this would refer to one piece of land, this would refer to another piece of land. That is inscribed in the law. That is that that clan ancestor is what they mean by for a site on the land, a sacred site on the land. Well, why is this important? Because by installing in this federal legislation, by installing into, quote, self-determination, this idea of an anthropological clan, it also installed into the law and into indigenous social relations an imaginary of clan and land that is proprietary, exclusive rights of discrete descent groups to own and decide what to do with their country. Now, this is not what the Karrabing's parents and ancestors or many indigenous people claimed was their relation to the country. They said, yes, and Karrabing, you'll see, will say, yes, we have our own land. For instance, Ruby Yerwin is a Nungudi, a black water snake. There's a place where the black water snake is, and her country is circumscribed around that. And Roy Yerwin is a Long Yam, and we know where that is, and it's his land, and his descendants are circumscribed around that. But the way it got there is a set of events that occurred in other parts of the land, that connect foundationally and irreducibly the place of Nungudi to other places. And in fact, this guy, Justice Woodward, who was sent out into the Northern Territory by the federal government to ask indigenous people, you know, if they could have their land back, how would they like the mechanism to operate? And Woodward said, you know, one thing we have to know, white settlers, is that property doesn't work the way it works for us. So people have their own country, right? So Ruby Yerwin has her Noongatee, and they own, in some sense, the right to do ceremony for the Noongatee, but they can't do the ceremony themselves. They need their cousins, that is from another place, to actually do the ceremony. Now, this isn't simply, and he said, this isn't like hiring a laborer. Those people who do the ceremony have the right to decide whether it's the right time to do it. So it's this relationship of interconnectivity, interdependence that underlines the way in which the Karrabing and others in the North said their ability to have their own land was based, and we'll come back to this. And so what the land rights did over from 76 onward was go into communities, go into these interconnected social relations and sever them and place Indigenous people in a warring position with each other. That is, it instituted this idea of property and competition between properties. And it was grinding away, and it ground away on the Belyuen community, which was, this whole area was put under a land claim in 76. And in 2007, after the land rights, this land right claim for the Cox Peninsula, which is this area here, had been heard, and only 3 members of this 250 persons community that was intermarried, did ceremony together, etc. Only 3 young people were declared to be the traditional Aboriginal owners of the community, ripping the community apart. And then a huge riot happened in which another group, not a clan, but another set of interconnected, what you would call friendship relations, was driven out of the community in order to seize jobs and houses. And then right after that, the federal government, independent of this, declared an emergency intervention on the basis of a sex panic. And I won't go into it other than to say that on the left, you'll see some of the things that the intervention changed. And it was primarily oriented towards seizing Indigenous lands after all this history. So there were a lot of now Indigenous lands. They had been created as property relations, but there was still a lot of it. And then the federal government said, you know, we need to get mining onto these lands. We need to get tourism ventures onto those lands. We need to open up these lands. And that's what the intervention did in 2007. They had also put these signs. See, these big signs are huge. They erected these signs anywhere that there was a road that led into an Indigenous community or Indigenous land. So we also discovered that there were Indigenous lands in places we didn't even know. It was like we'd be driving down the road and see one of these signs, which were really, you know, scarlet letter signs like Indigenous people are perverse. You're entering a perverse space. And we're like, we didn't even know this was Indigenous land. This is great. I wonder whose it is, right? So it was this horrible moment in which then about 50 members of this little community here became homeless, which is really a very precarious situation to be in if you're Indigenous in Australia, because you just fall off the planet. There's, you know, we worry about drug abuse. So it was 4 couples and their kids. And what they did is they overcrowded into Darwin here. And then the government initially said, if they went down here toward their traditional lands, then they would build housing for them, but that fell through. And so people were living for about 5 years in tents down in this region, which is very remote. Okay. And it was in this context, that is the collision of the federal government's removal of money from Indigenous social welfare in order to force Indigenous people to open their lands to mining, and the long arm of the divisive force of, quote, recognition or self-determination, that in around 2009, this group of folks that would have said they're Belyuen people of various clans came up with the idea of Karrabing. And they came up with the idea of Karrabing not only as a word, not only like, oh, Karrabing, let's call ourselves Karrabing, it means tide, we're tidal, but as a concept. That is a concept that explicitly was attempting to intervene in a settler imaginary in which either they were considered just to be like wandering around without any specific relations to country, or they were granted by the state a specific relation to the country, which was proprietary, exclusionary, and which cut the interconnective interdependencies between places, totemic places, the more than human world places, marriage and ritual. So Karrabing, that is the tide, is what is considered to connect countries and be the basis of a lot of their totemic dreamings. Now, so it's, and you'll see in the clips I show you, it's Karrabing says two things at the same time. It says, yes, each one of us has our own or one's own, or sometimes we say separate country, separate language, separate dreamings or totems. So on the one hand, yes, we're clans. On the other hand, it says, but the basis of us keeping that roan healthy, alive, and properly, we have to understand the determining connectivities. That is, connectivity is before one's roan. One cannot have one's roan, keep one's roan, if you do not keep the interconnectivities between them. And explicitly as a concept, it's saying that's what the settler state understands. That's why it doesn't think about the connectivities, because it doesn't really want us to keep our country and its more than human nature healthy and alive. It wants to rip into it and extract goods from it. So that's why they only focus on one side of this. Now, I myself know a lot about clans, and there's a whole other project that, here, let me try and get this bigger, whole other project that I've been doing, which tracks two clans or clan networks across time and inside the infrastructures of settler colonialism and the Black Atlantic, or the enslavement of millions of West Africans from the 16th, 15th century onwards. And in particular, this tracks the movement of one Povinelli clan, that is the Seamanot's clan, of which I'm a part. So Povinellis can trace, you can see this, trace their relation to country up in what is now the Italian Alps, but you know, it's been all kinds of things, actually back to the 1400s. And the emergence of Povinellis got so big that they started splitting into clans around the 1600s. With the invasion of Napoleon in the 19th century, the clan-based governance of Corzolo, which is this village area, that is the family-based way in which one could have one's own home in the flatland, but there was a shared or common usage of the pastures and the forests based on principles decided by those families, were modernized. That is, they were open to capital. And the slow extraction through capitalism that led to impoverishment, that led to my clan heading into the Americas, which was made possible because of the colonial dispossession of those Americas and because of the wealth generated by slavery. So it just kind of tracks our clan's elevation in terms of a racial hierarchy and an economic hierarchy, as on the right-hand side, we see the consequences of the form of roan and connected that is occurring to the ancestors of the Karrabing as the colonial world assaults their space. So the relationship between forms of roan and forms of connectivity, or roan and connected, what has been the basis for mine and their parents and grandparents, and then mine and their discussions about forms of actually existing other ways of being in relation to place, but also about the consequences of being inserted into this infrastructure based on whether you're considered white and a settler or indigenous and settled, right? So notice I really haven't said much about us as a film and art practice, the film and art practice of the collective. I've said instead a lot about how it emerged from the dispossessing logics of settler governance, and those dispossessing logics include, as Glenn Coulthard would say, both the dispossession of actual lands, but also the attempt to dispossess people of their understanding of how humans belong to the more than human world, including their own lands and the lands to which they are connected, right? And I will now turn to what we think, how that bears. So we emerge from that, and we emerge in order, and I can talk about the specifics of the day that we came up with this idea. But I should also say then the film and artistic practices of the collective are also oriented toward stubbornly refusing to be dispossessed either of one's own land or of the analytics of belonging that are captured in the phrase roan and connected. So I just thought I would show a few of just a few of images and then some film clips in order to suggest three kinds of practices that we think these films and artworks do and are for. And so if they've accomplished what they're supposed to do and for, there's no reason to do them anymore unless we have fun doing them. So maybe we'll keep doing them for fun. But to get a sense that the production of film and art isn't for film and art. It is for this other end. Okay, so the first thing I want to note is that the practice of, and I'm going to first show a bunch of installations, which is weird since we mainly are known for our films, but the first point that I want to show is that the practice of Karrabing is toward the thickening laterally across any generation, and the thickening in terms of passing this practice knowledge to the next generation, that it's a practice of archival thickening and descending through both a conceptual practice, but also a practice of designed to show, but not to give away. That is, not to show so that others in the collective can see, and the younger people can see, and all of them can do and see, without giving it away to any passing viewer. Okay, so for instance, these are just two instances of a work that we kind of call graffiti totems or graffiti dreamings. And they're spray paint, sometimes there's paint, spray paint on old corrugated iron. And here's another one we designed for the Guangzhou Biennale and had, because we couldn't go, had them spray paint it. So we designed it all up. Now, if you studied them, then you would start noticing a relationship between the words on this thing and some of the images as they pass from one iteration to another, right? But there will never be a moment in which these words are translated, nor a description of why they happen to flow left to right. That is, you'll encounter them and there might be a label that says graffiti dreaming totems of, or Karrabing graffiti totems or something like that. And we've been asked on a number of times in a lovely way is it possible to translate these things, or can we say a little more about them? And in fact, we usually don't. Although in Q&As, like I'll do now, we will say that the order of these words represent the geographical ordering of the land. So they're a kind of map. But we, in Q&As, people say, like me, like by adoption, me, I'm Moro. So here's Moro up here. We started doing this piece of artwork because we realized that the younger folks didn't know the order. They didn't have this geographical imaginary because they had been removed from their land. So as we tried to come back to this, try to get money to get everybody back to open up this place again for us, we started doing these spray paintings so that by the end of the second one, people were telling each other not only what order they should be in, but who should be spray painting which one of these based on whether it was your totem or it was your cousin's, or like, oh, but so-and-so shouldn't touch that one because they call them sis, or something like that, right? Depending on what the group was. And other elements popped out too. So on this right-hand side is a piece of a graffiti totem that Gavin Bianamu, Shannon Singh and I did for the Vargas Museum in the Philippines. And we're spray painting them. Here's Moro and here's Kugon. And then Gavin started flicking, he sprayed some stuff in a cap and he started flicking it on. I said, hey, what are you doing? Is that like, what's that? And he said, well, it's the sweat that connects all the country, because that's part of what the connections are. So it's our sweat as we go through the country, it goes into the country. So I was like, oh, okay, this is like, so it's like this slow deepening of the relation. This is another thing that we have done, which is a way of trying to demonstrate the persistence of their land, and in particular their totemic formations, in the context of kind of the unrelenting grip of extractive capitalism, which is leading to climate collapse and environmental toxicity. So this is Khmer dreaming, and this is Penanjiba dreaming, and they're the same image. You can see the Khmer over here and Penanjiba's over here, and these are just like toxic drum shit cut in half. And this is Mermaids Mirror Worlds. And what this shows is that the shape of this dreaming, which is big round reef dreaming, will insist and persist and determine the form of space, even if certain humans so screw up everything that its content are huge jugs of brown jugs of toxic chemicals. So it insists that, no, you're not going to go back and redeem the world per se, but that doesn't mean the power of the dreaming to persist and impose a form is diminished by extractive settler colonialism. The little image is the first one we did of these totemic, and when we realized that some of the young folks didn't understand it as a geography. So it's all the right ones, but where's the geography? And that led us to start really pursuing this. There's also, when we do the films, there are often these installations and some discourse about the proprietary clan-based the proprietary nature of settler forms of indigenous self-determination. So you hear self-determination, but it's the settler state's definition of self-determination. And behind this was, again, Gavin's idea. These are teeny tiny versions of these photographs from the 1904 of actually Ruby Irwin's grandfather and his sons, and then the wives and the daughters, juxtaposed on a old map, which you can't really see, from 1873, in which South Australia, just without ever being there, just created a cartographic map and sold off the whole area, while these folks were insisting that they were going to continue to live their way on their land. Practice of showing, because we want also, when we make the films, we make the art, we are actively and self-consciously using these as a practice of archival memory and building. So how do we keep this understanding of one's own country, but the foundational relations of connectivity? So if you're going to do these totemic maps, you got to show the relationship between them, right? Or either through the seriation of them, or as Gavin was doing, like flicking the sweat that then introduces particular members to all the different countries. But there's another way in which we try and show without giving away, because that's the settler way. Like if they invite you in, and if you're indigenous, not white indigenous, not like me, I might have a clan, but I'm white settler. But if they invite, say, other Karrabing members in, they often want them to explain their world to them. So could you explain? Could you give it all away, right? And so the price of entering and moving is basically having to hand over things. And so we think about we think about that, and then we think about, but we want to be making things that other members can see if they weren't involved, or relations that aren't members, or children being born into Karrabing now. So we've tried to develop forms of showing that we can read, we understand, because we know what the sounds mean, we know what the iconographic relations mean, but not necessarily, but audience don't know that, especially if you're not in Australian, you're not indigenous, or Australian, whatever. So I was just going to show you a couple clips, one from The Jealous One and one from The Mermaids, both short, in which we are doing this. And with The Jealous One, we're telling people we're doing it. These guys were not invited to our party because the older guy created a fight because he was very jealous of his wife for no reason. So they get excluded from this party where all the clans are getting together. And everyone's left.
What for we come here like this?
We jump in here, then we gotta tunnel, we swim, come on, then
You gotta be fucking kidding me. 300 fucking kilometers underground with my fucking drown there halfway.
You Calvin, you muddy, you can swim. You Gavin, you dulk, you can swim like me. Come on.
Fucking hell. Come on, Gav, we just do it. I'm gonna die halfway in the underground.
Oh, that's also nice to see. So there we actually signal, we say, if you know that this is based on this other story, then you already know what's going to happen, right? If you don't know, you might not know the relationship between those images, the what they're diving into, et cetera, et cetera. And then the movie heads on. But in that one, we tell the audiences, yeah, you can follow this. It's a story about the family that's in a fight because there's a jealous guy, and then they end up burning a car and something else happens. But if you know, then you know. And so we also signal to our kids, there's something to know here, right? And then there's a turning toward an investigation of what can be known amongst themselves. We often see them chattering amongst themselves or toward their elders. So there's an incitement to know from us, and there's a you don't know to the audience. Can I show you another clip from Mermaids, in which a similar kind of thing happens, but we don't even bother signaling it. And so let me try and do this. And The Mermaids is a story. It's a film about the near future, when settlers have so poisoned the earth that they can't go outside anymore, but indigenous people can and do. And so when we were like teasing out, so what's going to happen here? Gavin Bionamu, who you will see here, says, well, they do what they've always done, and they're still doing, which is that the settlers would try and extract something from our body and our land that they can use to save themselves. And so the film is about a young man who's been in one of these settler experiments and is thrown out back into his family's world, and his uncle and his cousin take him across the landscape, introducing him to the totems and stuff. And they're heading toward the mud dreaming, which is called the mud place, where these blowflies, these like ravenous blowflies, live. That's enough said. So I'm just going to show you a quick little segment of it. That this is Gavin here. This is Aiden thrown out of the experiment, and this is the uncle, father, whatever. So they've reached the mud place. Oh, no, that's not the mud place. Where is it supposed to be? 20. So they get to the mud place. Here we go.
That dream, that mud dream. Kujuba, Magula Pelican. They're jealous spread, you get Lamuko Masri. They're running a D, you got the D in Pingamut Blue Flower. Martin, chuck them like air and Blue Flower come now. The bar the back one there. You still there, the thing, the creek side. And what we know family that place.
Is that true?
Yeah, before, but today, oh, there's no more hope for them.
Okay, just the very beginning of that clip, if you know what those sounds are, you already know what's going to happen. If you don't, you probably don't know what Aiden is already, and thus why he's doing what he's going to do, why he ends up doing what he's going to do, and what the consequences of it are there. So there's just little things to go, you don't know, but there's a whole set of iconography, I can never say that word, ICON, and sound images that we know are telling people who is what in a whole set of stacked ancestral presence. But all of this, so in some ways we make films in order to create, both to act them out so that we come to know as we're acting, to create an archive that differentiates audiences, the ours who can ask, who can learn, who, when they show up to a country and we say, see, look, calling up there. They were like, calling up, mermaid calling up. So they deep and enriching, right? On the one hand, and then an audience who will feel it, but not have it, will be shown, but will not be able to walk away with it. Right. But the final, two final things I want to show, or I think I'll just show one final so we have enough time to talk. I was going to show a little short film, a 2-minute film we did for the Wexner Center for their Cinetrax project, which just gives you, it's a little short film showing us bushwhacking our way to that. If you remember, I said where they ended up homeless to the bottom of that bay. And we're able to engage in this, for us, epic bushwhacking journey to expand the archive, to split audiences, that is to be able to move without giving it away. But also the way we use film income to in a redirection way. So we don't use the income we make from the films to make more films or art. We just keep scraping that off me because in those two clan structures that I showed you, one descending from Corzolo, but then entering into the infrastructures of white supremacy and colonialism, value is accumulated here. So we can scrape it off, and we make them. We can talk about how we make them. And then we use the funds we make to invest in boats and trucks and solar power and whatever to get people into these lands to which they are connected, so that by the time they're talking, they've already felt this obligation to them. So if Karrabing's like 50 odd people, we have toddlers who have been to this country before their grandparents and great-grandparents. It's because it's been sealed off. So we've been able to take the young people. So the Wexner film just shows us bushwhacking in there. But the final thing I just want to end with is if the films are a practice of thickening up this Karrabing analytic of belonging, if they're a practice of financial redirection so that we can deepen that practice by getting to places, ultimately the Karrabing works are for the ancestral present and what we would understand to be the ancestral future. That is, we're making art not for any reason other than to keep strong a Karrabing understanding of an ancestral presence. And so I want to just show you a interview that we made for Carriageworks, the National 2021 or something, which is showing in Sydney at the moment, in which folks are talking exactly about this.
Karrabing means that low tide turning. In Emmy.
Like we got Suntu group, we got Kiyok, we are run, they got their own place and own story, like we our own country. We got Trevor map, they got their own country, got own language, own story. We got Bujut map, they got their own story. Emmiyenggal map got their own story, like Mabluk. Mendiyenggal map got their own story, like Kugun map. But we still one map.
And there's a thing with that.
Even though we all got different language and different land, but we all connected to one.
Story where the dulk
We're not different, we all one mob. And that makes us Karrabing.
If certain people got certain little area, I mean everybody should agree to one. Say that belongs to them, but we still one big family. We still all connected. White men been bringing the story, probably just force people to say, come and this for that people land and that, and certain people get.
They're the one making the
You got
decision.
TO for that
Indigenous
for
lands.
that
Can I help you?
area and TO. Somebody even locked that bloody gate here.
Yes, you have to have the paperwork filled out. You have to have the apologist go over your claim.
Everyone's a TO, little bit of land. Everyone TO for TO for that
it's the
little bit
law.
of land. TO of that little bit. Then you get big
How am I supposed to know?
argument, big fight, spear fight. Everybody killing each
I
other.
can't hear you. I can't hear you.
When people don't go back there and mind if that country go away, or go back and look. Country shut themselves up. And they hide everything. And they need to go back there, they hide him everything now.
Must be thinking about that place. I remember come here long time ago. You think with yourself, you know? You remember don't come here like Lawi country. Yes, they're jealous and that more one then. But we have to think like go back there like that country. We have to smoke them up ourselves, you know? Yeah, for a sweat and thing like that. Yeah. When we do that now, it'll settle down then.
We got thing there to set up now. Organizing some painting now to be set up.
Well, when you go back to the country and set them up thing, and just that country come alive again, you know? Because they know that family will come back to this country and they're doing something for it and looking after the place. And them sites and fish trap, everything.
We're alive.
When we go into art, it's like so we can get people to understand in a different way. That's a new dimension thing. That's how we go into making the film about art, and the art includes dream inside and it tells story. And then when we go back to our country, we see a lot of we sort of feel spirit there, no? Because spiritual thing, and like our ancestors welcome us back.
They're gonna like feel something. Yeah, feel something. They've been put them painting here from them up all of family. Oh, that's good. Maybe they're thinking of themselves. Yeah, that country. Yeah, they'll be proud. I think. Yeah.
And we're giving back to the ancestors. Giving back what they give us in the beginning, and then now it's our turn to give back to them.
Only our indigenous mob, the white people see, young kids, they can.
That's it. I'm over. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was a wonderful talk and presentation of the film. I wanted to quickly say that Elizabeth talk is part of the AFIELD study program, especially the iteration images as assembly. And so, which asks us to think how images can bring people together in ways that challenge the colonial, patriarchal, capitalist, extractivist logic of the contemporary times and thinking about the post-pandemic future. And I think that the way Elizabeth works with her film and also in this talk shows really well how the Karrabing project is really about healing the wounds, the separation, the conflict and the trauma created by the white settler logic. By creating new connection, looking at reproducing ancestral knowledge, but in a way that also hides it for non-Indigenous communities. And also the way your films in the process challenge the logic of the clan by creating this coming together, which is friendship, and it's about more than a kind of fluid ways of thinking about togetherness. I was also very curious to maybe expand a little bit on the relationship between the film process and the modern human context, and especially asking if you can expand a little bit on the notion of toxic sovereignty that you describe more on your previous film, in the sense that in your film, there's not only a connection with the ancestral environment, but there's also a relationship with the toxic, extracted environment. And the role of the Karrabing is also to some kind of heal also this relationship with the environment.
The way I phrased it as toxic sovereignty came initially from a event that happened when we were filming our second movie called Winjita Maru. And we were still using a really great cinematographer, but we're rushing, it was on his time. But in any case, we the basic plot of the Winjita Maru what it was thought up by three of the young guy members of the collective: Reggie, Jarek, Gavin Bionamu, and Kelvin Bigfoot. And they said to all of us, we have a good idea for a film. We find we're walking through the bush, we find 2 cartons of beer, and then the police accuse us of stealing it and they chase us through the bush. And everyone was like, oh, that's a fine beginning of that seems fun. But then the way it works in our collective, everybody just puts in their ideas and the part they want to play. So very quickly, other people said, well, it can't just be about our young guys stealing, because that's already the image of everything. So we need to have some sense that we're also looking after our country. So we put in 2 land rangers, which are this kind of indigenous program protecting country. And so the whole thing ended up like this. It was like, and then Rex Edmonds, who you hear talking strongly about the way traditional owners divide land, said, well, we should put in the people who really are stealing stuff, and that's the miners. So the plot turned into 4 young guys find 2 cartons of beer in the bush, right next to, unbeknownst to them, 2 of their relations who are helping miners illegally blast near a sacred site because they have so many fines from the settler state for drinking. And then the young kids and the older guys get in a fight, and the older guys call the cops, and they're chased through the bush. The younger guys chase the bush, and they're chased through the bush until they hit a fence. line that says, don't go any further, toxic or poison. And so the young guys keep running, and the cops stop, and then they come back around, and it's a standoff. The young guys are in a toxic swamp, and the entire community and police are just outside of it. And so we're inside this mangrove, and we're shooting the scene, and everything's improvised. There's a basic plot, but depending on what people say, the thing can turn any which way. But since we all grew up together, we basically know how it all goes. We knew who was going to be arrested for stealing. It wasn't going to be the miners. So anyways, we're in the mangrove, and the part of the story was, okay, now Reggie, who actually did have a warrant out for him, is anxious because if police come in and grab him, he has a warrant out on him and he'll go to jail. And then Kelvin, who's his older brother, is supposed to reassure him and say something reassuring. So that's the whole thing. And so it's like, okay, ready, set, go. And Kelvin, Kelvin thought for a minute what he wanted to say. And then I said, Reggie, right? Yeah, okay, go for it. Reggie, oh, there they are. What if they come in here? I don't want to go back to jail. And Kelvin says, don't worry, they won't come in here. This is a poisoned area. There's too much radiation. We're safe. They won't come in here. We're safe. And he keeps on saying it's like really because it's so radioactive. And then I was just this moment in which I thought, we all kind of looked at Kelvin and was like, that is fucking brilliant. That's exactly right. And we talked about it after. It's like the place in which Kelvin, who at that point was maybe 17, the place in which he can have full sovereignty, he can determine his life, is in the spaces that the extractive settler capitalism have so ravished that they won't go to, right? But, and then the scene unfolds in which Kelvin also, when Reggie says, but I don't want to die here. And Kelvin says, our fathers died first, we can die after. So he's also saying this is a long-standing relation, not new. This is very old. This is a mode in which we have continued to persist in the toxic wastelands of the settler capital state. And then Mermaids picks that up. And then this film we're doing now called, I don't know what it's called The Family or The Zombie or something, is set in the ancestral future in which this one little family, this set of like grandmothers and kids are being stalked by a zombie. And I'm the zombie because I'm the only white person in the group. And it's, we're in the process of finishing it, but it's again, it's very Karrabing. It's like, no, the white people could completely disappear and the ancestors could have survived, but there's not going to be a purification. There's still going to be plastic laying around, and there's still going to be a zombie, a white melting thing that still wants to try and eat us, right? But the future is a question not of like, how do you erase the past, but whether there's going to be one or many zombies, right? So the notion of toxic sovereignty is a non-psychotic relation, not only to the more than human world and the animal and the plants, but the more than human world that they and their dreamings are also living in, which are PCPs and climate toxicity and plastic and all of that. Zoe Todd, for those of you who haven't read it, has a great essay on trying to, like, building on her First Nation understanding of relationality as the foundation of human and more than human worlds, trying to say, how can I be related not only to my fish totem, but to the oil in the streams? Like, can I, since that is now part of my world, how do I establish the kind of relationality I have with the plants and the animals and this toxic substance. So it's interesting that Karrabing and say in the what we now call the Americas First Nations are also, it's like, you know, they're with us. And it's the settler that has a psychotic understanding of their external relation to it, or somehow it's going to disappear. Like there's this new science technology that's somehow magically going to create an infrastructure of green climate, but it's not going to be built out of extractive. I mean, it's psychotic. So yeah, I guess that's the way I'd answer it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, we open up to question now.
Well, thank you so much for a fantastic story. Just a very simple question. I want to know, how did you start cooperating, or how did you all together form the Karrabing Film Collective? What was, was it invitation to you, or yeah?
Well, okay, yeah, that's fine. So I briefly referred to it, but my white family comes from this village, right? And so we grew up, the drawing book outlines this. So if you really want the whole backstory, it's there in the inheritance. But my family was raised under the image of a way of relating to a set of families, Ambrosis, Nellas, Povinellis, etc., Maestros, and a way of relating to a place that wasn't national nor proprietary, but something else. Even as it was clear by my generation that this place didn't exist anymore. So there was this double movement of you are a Simenos Povinelli, you are from Corsolo. Well, where's Corsolo? And it would just be a fight. Is it Italy? Is it Austro-Hungarian Empire? What, or either one of those relevant, et cetera, right? So I grew up with this sense of non-national, clan-based, land belonging thing. And then blah, blah. And after I graduated from college in a philosophy program, great books program, there was a fellowship that basically wanted to get kids out of the country. So I had seen some movies, actually, some films, some Australian films from the 80s. And I made a little proposal saying I wanted to go to Australia and see how things were changing or something. And so I showed up in 1984. Had a little motorcycle, went to Belyuen, which it was like dirt roads. It was much farther than it is now because it was much more rural. And I met the generation above me and the one above them. I had grown up in the woods. So there was this really deep, whoa, this sounds like my family. And they were like, no, white people. And I was like, no, up in those Alps, it was different. So we really talked. And then we also talked about the fact that the consequences of if you're white with a clan, than if you're black with a clan. So that was just day one, 1984. And over the course of the year when I was there, I slowly got to understand this land claim they were trying to win. And when I had to go back, they asked if I'd be their lawyer for the claim, because by law, they have to be represented by law or an anthropologist. And I was like, I don't want to be a lawyer. And so they said anthropologist. And I've told this story 1,000 times, but I'll tell it again, in which I was like, I don't know what that is. And they said, white people studying us. I was like, whoa, no. And they're like, no, let's together try and understand this thing happening. So, and I thought it was a great alibi to continue doing it. So from 84 onward, basically I commuted. And I grew up with people who are now members of Karrabing. And we were taught by the same group of people because they're everyone's parents. And we did whatever we did. So if we're doing land claims or building outstations or raising kids or gambling or hunting or whatever it is, that's what we did. And I would just externalize a book from it, a theoretical book from it. Not hard. And if you live at this end of a sewer pipe, you really see things critically in a very different way. But in day to day, we live. So when 2007 happened and this big riot happened, everyone was just Belyuen. And when they sent emails and stuff, or they got people to send emails, and they asked whether I was just going to go back to Belyuen or I was going to come and when I was there, be homeless with them. And so that's what we did. And it was this particular day that another level of horrific shit happened. And we're all sitting around. We've been, we're down at Bulgol way out. And someone said we should just hang ourselves. And it's a real serious thing if you say that, because like people do now. And everybody was feeling down. And it was like, yeah, why? And then Suntu said, let's go hunting. That makes us feel better. So we did. And then when we came back, we felt better. And Linda Yerwin said, you know what, screw this. Why don't we make a little film showing that how basically between these two forms of governance, we are being smashed. And we're like, yeah, that's what we'll do. But nobody knew how to, and they had a very particular way. They said, you go find someone who knows what they're doing. And so we can act out and tell our story and look good, because I wanted this particular image. So that's how we started. It was like, okay. And then after 2 films, we just swapped over to the production process. Like at that point, we were like, why are we going on someone else's production process, which imagines a kind of sociality that doesn't exist for us? That is, imagines like for 6 days, from 6 to 10, you will be available to do your shoot. And it's like, oh, that's not us. So we swapped over to iPhones, and then we just make them. So no, it wasn't my idea. And we had already known each other for what, 1984 to 2007. So what is that? Long time, 23 years, something like that. So we've grown up, and I think you can see them in the films. They're all extemp. And there's a fluidity, there's no scripting, there's a fluidity because we sat on top of each other, even as we deeply acknowledge the way the world treats us and capacitates us differently. So we take that into account. It is part of Karrabing that we suck the money off of the way it accumulates in excess around one member. Does that help? Okay.
Thank you. Other questions?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I think there's quite a lot of people here who are into community building and collectives, and I wonder if there's any takeaway that you could give us about how you, as a family-based collective, how is that fluidity happening on a almost everyday level between you? How do you create? How does that work?
Yeah, it's such a good problem because it is family-based, and I'm imagining a lot of you have family, and so we know the real of family, right? The whole thing. You love, you hate, you're angry, you quit, you rejoin. All of that is constantly in it, and in the context of massive poverty and racism. So think of the pressures, daily I mean, it's hard to, we all think people wouldn't get it. They just don't get it unless they come and they see they don't get it. The kind of really daily nature of poverty and racism. So one of the reasons that we have done films and done these installations and the artwork is because it brings people together in a fun activity. I mean, and it can be really fun. I mean, our films, I showed you a couple clips that are more serious, but our films are actually really funny. Like they're very serious, and then they're just so funny. And the zombie film is hysterical, and it like the kids, because I'm the zombie, and so the zombie is in white clay every which way, and so part of it was just like getting all, getting it in my ears, and it's just so it's me playing zombie, and so it's super fun, along the way, as we're having fun, like people learn things. So the first thing is got to be fun, to be honest. And when it's not, when it's a drag, and there's no reason for anybody to do it. I mean, you do get like, you know, for everything, everyone gets $700 no matter what you do, because that's day to day taps down the jealousy. So we've had, well, so-and-so didn't do very much. And it's like, and then someone will say, yeah, but if we don't do it all the same, then jealousy gonna pop up. So we, you know, so we think about who we are, really, like not pretend wise. And then we do that. And we also say, if this ends tomorrow, that's okay, to try and like tap it down. And we also know what it's really for. We don't have any rules, really. Like people say, how many members? We're like 30, 50, because it's not like you can come back in, right? So, okay. We have meetings, everybody has to decide what you do with things. And then you also know that you're stuck together with each other. And that includes me, if I can get back in. So, and that's really important, because you can fight, but you know, you're gonna come back. So we also, it's like, well, like so-and-so doesn't like to do this, but so-and-so likes to do that. So it's, you know, it's just a lot of, Linda, you know, whenever there's a bit, and like, there've been really big fights. I mean, my white family comes from very violent. So I know from violence, I know from Alps violence, I'm fine with violence. And it's a very, you know, these are rough places. And what Linda always says, when push comes to shove and one of us are being attacked, we know that everyone else will show up for us. We might, you know, not be talking to each other for like, someone's not talking to somebody. But, you know, but it can be precarious. Like we've had divorces and it's like, oh shit, man, what happens with the divorce? Like we've had one big one that right down the center, and it's, you know, so you also, I think you always, you know what, why you're doing it, you know, toward which you're doing it, so that if it morphs into something else, okay, it does, you know, whatever. It wasn't for it itself, you know what I mean? And we now have gotten this road in, we've gotten the kids there, we've started like the dry season residence for the ancestors they're talking about. So, and I should say, day to day, we don't do Karrabing Film Collective. Day to day, we go shopping and we go hunting, and we go fishing, and we, I don't know, go out bush and watch TV. And so, and then in the middle of that, we do some shooting. Someone has the idea, then someone will say, and my job is to remind people we're supposed to be doing it. Like, oh, you guys, when are we going to do it? Or someone will say, what are we doing today? Anything? I'll say, I don't know. You want to go shoot something? Let's go see where so-and-so is. Oh, so-and-so's like somewhere else. Okay, well, whatever. No, we'll just work it around. So it's also extraordinarily flexible. No rules, ultimate flexibility, putting up with each other's like same story, blah, 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 including me. When I get mad, I'm never coming back. And now the COVID, oh, fuck that. But you just put up with each other. But I think because also it's family based, and I know it's hard because I'm white, and it's like, what does that mean? But you know, we've grown up together. It's different than other forms of collective, I think. Don't you think, Sandra? It's different than other forms of collective. It makes the connectivity stronger. It also makes them more fraught.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Any other question?
Just wanted to make a little comment before when Beth was talking about the toxicity of oil and everything. I mean, this is a little bit like this, you know, the way you described the virus, you know, the coronavirus, like some like 1 year ago, actually. You know, oil is nothing bad. It's also an archive of everything under the earth. But if it's displaced, you know, the thing is oil is not toxic per se. It's actually, if it's in its place, it's wonderful. Yeah, exactly. But if it's placed, you know, it's the same with any kind of poison. It's like, it has to do with, if you take it out of its place, it gets toxic and it gets.
And if you make it grown as something that becomes, if you shape it into the commodity, shape it into commodity form in a proprietary.
Exactly. And so these things are not toxic per se. They are like in their decontextualizing process, in their tearing apart, and in their
which Karrabing is opposed to. The Karrabing concept is like, if you kept that. So when we talk about the COVID virus, the way we understand it is that virus was fine in its way of being related. But people don't. People want to pull things apart in order to circulate it for surplus value. And what do you think is going to happen? That's what we say. What do you think is going to happen? What do you think has happened? Like, you don't think will happen. What do you think has happened? So anyways, thank you guys. I hope it wasn't too much, but I really thank you for inviting me, and I hope
it was wonderful. Elizabeth.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
It was wonderful.